And Rosemary, these are your grandparents?
This is my dad's parents. That would be Frank and Anna Fischer.
And when was this picture taken?
That I don't know. I think it was in the back of the picture. Yeah.
Was this a special photo? Or?
I think he went to the studio and just had a special picture taken. I think it was 1917, I think.
And was this typical garb for that time?
Their best garb for Sundays.
And
yes.
was it always black?
Mostly black. Mm-hmm.
And what about the necklace around her neck?
She always wore a cross. Every day she wore a cross. That's probably part of her tradition, her religious tradition.
And what do you remember the most about this set of grandparents?
Well, like I was hoping my dad would stop there on the way home from church, stop to visit with him a little bit. And then Grandpa walking out to our place during thrashing all the time and helping out a little bit wherever he could. He'd always walk. And then Grandma with her loaves of bread where she would cut a piece off and give it to us, put a little sugar on there, and that was a treat for us.
The sugar or the bread?
The sugar on well, both, really, because she had these huge homemade loaves of bread.
Anything else about this pair of grandparents?
And they went to bed with the chickens when it got dark and got up as soon as it got light. They didn't use hardly any lanterns or anything. They just went accordingly.
What about in the winter?
Wintertime, well, then they had to. There they had to.
But in the summertime, no.
Summertime, no.
And in this photo?
That's Marcus and Rosa Armbrust, my mother's parents. And they moved into town from north of Belfield probably in 1921. And then my grandpa got sick. I don't remember too much of my grandpa, but Grandma, I stayed with her for 2 years when I went to school in town here. And they were just a nice grandma. She never seemed to get upset about anything and make sure that you had everything that you needed. She'd go to Mass every morning, and she'd always have my breakfast ready on the table for me to eat before I went to school.
And what was breakfast?
Breakfast was usually cereal and a glass of milk. And I didn't like the milk because those days it wasn't pasteurized. The cream would come up on top, you know. But yeah, and I remember one time she burnt her hand, and she ran to the flour container and put her hand in there. I guess it was supposed to help with the burns. Later on you find out it was the wrong thing to do. But no, she was a very religious person.
Can you describe some of the things she would do as far as religion was concerned?
Oh, I'd go to church every day, pray a rosary every day, sitting by the window, saying her prayers with a prayer book. Did a lot of praying.
And this grandpa, did you know him well?
I did know him well. Like I said, I just remember him coming to town, and he would be outside waiting for us as soon as he saw the car stop to help carry in food, or maybe there was a little one to be helped carried in. He was there, right, to help him, to help us. And then the last I remember of him sitting on the edge of the bed. He was already sick. And when we came to town that Sunday, he asked us little ones all to come over to him. And that's the last I remember of Grandpa Armbrust. I think shortly after that he passed away.
And this is a rather large group that we have here.
Yes.
And who are these individuals?
Okay. Can I point to him or?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. That's Uncle George Armbrust. And that would be his wife that you're pointing to right there. His wife, Elizabeth. That's Uncle Marcus Armbrust.
Marcus?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's skip over to this one over here before we get to that one there. That's Uncle John Armbrust. He died at the age of 35. That's my mother, Bertha, and my dad, Joe Fischer. Let's go over here. That's Uncle Florian Armbrust. And we'll start at the bottom there then. That's Uncle Rose Armbrust. She worked at Cloverdale Creamery, and then she was a priest housekeeper for about 25 years.
What was her name again?
Rose Armbrust. In fact, I was born on her birthday. That's why we have the same name. She happened to be my baptismal sponsor, too. And then there's Uncle Anton Armbrust. And that's his wife standing behind, Veronica, standing behind him.
Veronica?
Mm-hmm. There's my Grandpa Armbrust. And my Grandma Armbrust. And then was Uncle Casper Armbrust. And his wife, oh, I can't think of her name right now. I'm blank. And that's Anna Armbrust. She also was a housekeeper for priests. For, I think, 50-some years she cooked for priests.
Okay. And what was it about these aunts and uncles that you remember?
Oh, well, like I say, Aunt Anne, we would go and visit her. And then I stayed with Aunt Rose. She would help me with my homework when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade. My Uncle Florian lived on a ranch. I never did get out there. Then my other uncles, they lived north of town in the Kildare, Belfield area, and never ever got to their places. They just didn't get to go along, you know.
Is there anything else about this group that you would like to share?
I think that's about it.
Now, who is this little group here?
This is my parents' wedding picture, Joe and Bertha Fischer. And their attendants was Marcus Armbrust and Clammy Fischer.
And who? Anna?
Clammy.
Clammy.
Uh-huh.
How do you spell that?
Clemie. They were married at St. Joseph's Church. And they had their wedding dinner at Grandma's house.
And did your mother ever talk about her wedding day?
No, she never
Never
did.
talked about it? So there are no stories?
There's
that she
no
passed
stories,
on?
huh? They just didn't tell you those things those days. Well, I think if she'd have lived longer, we'd have started asking more questions.
And
Which we didn't
did
have.
she keep the dress?
Yes, she had the dress, but I don't know what happened to it. Her veil was put in one of these pictures with their wedding picture, and it disappeared. It was one of these round oval frames. Their wedding picture was in the bottom, and her veil was on the top. It was rounded glass. We don't know what happened to it. We do have another wedding picture of them, and you probably saw it in the hallway there, a big one with oval glass of a wedding picture.
And
But there was no dance or anything. You just got married, and that was it. Had their dinner.
it changed when you were married to
Oh,
doing
yes.
dances
Mhm.
and such. Did your parents ever talk about the differences between your wedding and theirs?
Does that cost more money? More work. Oh.
Okay, and in this first picture?
That's my mother at her first Holy Communion.
And why do they wear white?
It was just, everybody always wore white for their first communion. And
Tradition?
Tradition. It was tradition.
And what is she holding?
She's holding a prayer book and a candle. The candle you get at the church when you make your first communion. And the prayer book and the rosary you buy. And that's what she's holding. And the picture was taken at a studio.
And how old do you think she was then?
I would say on here she was about 12. Because in those days it seems like they made their first communion. In later years they didn't have a chance to go to school or for the education in order to make your first communion, because you had to go have religious education with the priest.
And what about that second photo?
The second picture I think is out on a farm where she's with in the garden. And they always wore hats when they were outside so they don't get sunburned.
And was that typical gardening? A typical gardening outfit?
No, I don't think it was a typical gardening. I think she just kind of dressed up more for that than being there was going to be a picture taken.
Was this at the house where she was raised?
On the farm.
And is this also your mother?
That's my mother. It was taken at a studio. And I would say she was probably about 22, 23 years old on that picture.
And why do you think she went to get a picture taken at this time?
They just did in those days. It seemed like they went to the studio and they had a lot of pictures taken. They would have pictures taken with their friends or their siblings. And the next picture beside her, I think that was about the same age, probably 23, also taken at the studio.
And was that also traditional garb right there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like she's wearing a necklace, too.
Yeah, I can't tell if it's a cross or if it's a medal. Or
It looks like a cross.
a cross, huh?
In this photo here?
Was my dad and my mother before they were married.
And how old do you think your dad was here?
On here, I would say he was probably about 22. And my mother, I would say she was probably about the same, about 22 years old.
So she was about 22, 23 when she got married.
And she was 24 when she got married. But this was before they got married, so.
And this is also your mother.
That's my
It's
mother,
just a larger photo.
larger photo, and was also taken at the studio.
And the pleated skirts, was that a...
At one time there, they were wearing pleated skirts.
And the blouse?
The blouse and the dark stockings.
Was her hair short, or was it just up?
I think here it was just up.
And in this photo we have a
This is-
large family.
Yeah, this is my dad's family. My grandpa Frank and Anna Fischer's family.
And can you tell us who they are on the back row?
The first one is Uncle Frank Fischer. And to this day, he turned 100 years old in October of 1908. And he's the only surviving sibling left of them, and he lives in California. And he's been married like 75 years. They had their 75th wedding anniversary and his 100th birthday last October, 1908. And then there's Aunt Clammy right next to him. Did you want her married name or no? Okay? And then there's Uncle Mike Fischer. And then there's Sister Edwalda. There's Uncle Nick Fischer, Aunt Barbara, and Melker Fischer.
What?
Melker, Melchoior, Melker.
And then in the front row?
The front row is Sister Herlindis,
And then next to her?
Grandpa Fischer, Ann Fischer, and then Grandma Fischer, Sister Clemencia, and my dad, Joe Fischer.
Was your dad the oldest?
No, Clammy was the oldest than my dad.
What can you tell us about the aunts here? I mean, it seems unusual that there would be 3 nuns in one family.
In those days, it seemed like more went for to go to their religious life. The larger families. And the 3 of them did, and I think Grandma was hoping that Anne would go too, but she didn't, because after she graduated from the 8th grade, and then they sent her to school in Bismarck. She went to high school in Bismarck, and I think they thought maybe she would have that religious profession too, but she didn't. She went on to get married.
And your other 2 aunts?
The 2 aunts, they both got married. Clammy lived in Washington, Yakima, Washington. She was married. And Aunt Barbara, she married a Jaeger here in town. So I don't ever remember getting out to the Jaeger farm. And Aunt Clammy, she lived in Yakima, but she would come home on the train every summer and help when they were thrashing, to help with the cooking and the lunch preparing and all this and that. And Uncle Mike Fischer, he moved to Washington. And so did Uncle Frank, he lived in California. And Melker Fischer, he lived on the home place. And Nick, he farmed north of town, or south of town here. And then Anne, she worked at the St. A's Hospital, and then she got married. He was in the service, and then they moved also to California. That's what I remember about them.
Is there anything else you
And then the two of the nuns, sisters.
Which ones?
Sister Herlinda's, this one, and this one. They came from Minnesota, from St. Joseph's Convent at St. Joseph, Minnesota, and they joined the priory when the priory went up Bismarck. But Sister Clemencia, she stayed there because she was seamstress and sewing the vestments for the priests and the altar cloths. And she didn't know if she came back what she would be doing. So she stayed there, and she did that, and she developed Alzheimer's disease, and then she passed on. She was 63. She was the first one to pass on from that family.
So she was still fairly young.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And this is your family, correct?
This is my family, my siblings. This was taken, I would say about 1944. Just when my 2 older brothers were drafted into the service, and they had this family picture taken just before they left. So I'm on the end. Then my oldest brother Joe, and then my brother Jenny. Then my brother Frank, my sister Tilly. That's the top row. That is my dad, my sister Florence, my younger brother Albert, my sister Anne, and my mother.
And was this an unusual occurrence that your family would go to the studio and take a photo?
Yes, it was for us, but I think the reason they did it because the boys going to the service didn't know what would be happening there, so they wanted his family picture taken.
And the girls, I see your younger sisters, their hair is
In locks.
In locks. How was that done?
How was that done? With rags. You had strips of cloth, and then you took a section of hair, and you wrapped it around this section of cloth, and you had a piece of cloth hanging down. Then you took that piece that was hanging down and re-wrapped it up again. And after they were dry, you took that out, and that was the locks.
How long did that take?
15 minutes. It didn't take very long. You just had this cloth, this strip of cloth that you wrapped the hair around it, and then wrapped it back up from the bottom so the hair was fully covered. And you tied it up atop and let them dry. Usually dried overnight, and then next day, usually did that on weekends for Sunday. And they had locks.
And you were in the other older sister, your hair is curly as
Yes.
well. How was that done?
Well, we got home perms. And when we did our hair, we did it in those little pin curls. You wrapped it around your finger, and then you stuck a bobby pin in there. That's how that was done.
And how long would it take you to do that?
That, probably close to half an hour for mine, because at that time my hair was very thick. And I think Tilly hair is about the same. And then for when we washed our hair, we used vinegar for a rinse because it was hard water and it would be gummy. So our rinsing basin, we added a little bit of vinegar. It's like a hair conditioner and all. It helps soften the water, and so the hair was easier to comb out. Oh.
And did your mother make the dresses that you and your sisters are wearing?
Not these here, but she made the one that she's wearing, she made. And the one that my sister Florence and Ann are wearing, she made. But me and Tilly, no. But my other two sisters and her dress was made. And I think my younger brother Albert, I think his pant outfit that he had on was made too. And this was a later family picture taken in 1958.
And on the back?
That's me. That was taken July 4th, and my daughter Lorene was born a month later. In August. That's why I'm standing back there.
You would never know.
No. Then my brother Joe, he was the oldest. My sister Florence. My brother John, he really grew up from the last picture. My sister Ann. My sister Tilly, and she just come home from the hospital on July 4th because she just brought a new baby home when this picture was taken. My dad, Joe Fischer. My brother Albert. My mother, Bertha. And my brother Frank.
And what was everybody doing at this point?
At this point, I think we were all married, starting our own families, except for my youngest brother.
And how old was Albert?
Albert, at this, I would say he was about 10, maybe.
Is there anything unusual about this picture, or that stands out that you remember?
Just, well, like her coming home with a baby and me having a baby a month later. And no, that's about it. And that's our wedding picture. In those days, they had attendants, and plus they also had what we call witnesses. The witnesses had to be over 21 years of age. So my brother Joe, he was a witness. And then George's brother or cousin Joe Berger, he was one of the attendants. course, there's George, myself. My brother Frank was an attendant. And then George's brother Val, he was the other witness. And then here was Sister Tilly, she was a bridesmaid. And this is a niece, she was George's niece, she was the flower girl. And then George's sister Barbara.
And your dress, it seems unusual for that point in time. Is there anything?
Well, that's where George sent the material. He was stationed in Japan. He sent the material home, and my mother made the dress. And she just looked at a pattern and made it.
Did it take her a long time?
It took her a few days. And I think she put lace around the train part.
And your bouquet?
And your bouquet, it was a fresh bouquet. Bought that, carnations. And the veil, I still have that. And I have the flowers, I dried them and put them in a picture frame. So I still have those too.
And how long did the wedding last?
Well, from 10 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock the next morning.
And how long did it take you to prepare?
Well, I drove in from the farm, and then I got dressed at, because we lived on the farm, but George's dad and his sisters, they were living in town. So I brought a dress along, got dressed in town, because it was just too long to be sitting in a car, dressed up. I suppose about an hour.
Hair and all.
Yeah.
Was there anything else about your wedding or the
Like
reception that you
Like I
shared?
said, we had the noon meal, that they hired ladies to cook the meal, and we brought the meat that was prepared, and we baked the pies and the cake, and brought the potatoes, and made the coleslaw and whatever was needed. That was the noon meal, and then we went to the studio, had our pictures taken, and probably drove around town a little bit, and then by that time it was time for what we called supper. And there again it was cooked by two ladies, and then we had like relatives, sister-in-laws, or whoever helped serve the meal. They put the food on the table. Everything was family style. It was not buffet style. It was all set on the table. Because those days you didn't have that many people invited either. Your aunts, your uncles, and probably some of your cousins. So it wasn't that many. But yeah.
And what is this celebration?
This is our 50th wedding anniversary. That was 10 years ago. That'd be 1998.
And what was special about this day? Who was able to celebrate with you?
Well, all our kids were home with their families, grandkids, and we had a mass, and all the grandkids, they each got a rose, and they brought in church. They gave me each red roses, and then we had somebody was singing was it the Ave Maria, I think, and then I carried the roses over to the side altar, which was what we call the Blessed Mother altar. And there was a vase up there, and I presented the roses in this vase to the Blessed Mother. And after Mass, we had a meal at the KC Club. We had all the relatives invited, friends. And so we had a big meal there. And so, yeah, we didn't have a dance or anything, but we just had a family reunion. So. Then this is also our 50th wedding anniversary, and our granddaughter, Chelsea, she modeled my wedding dress and veil. And our grandson, Bobby, he just had on his own suit. He was too tall to fit in George's. So and then they kind of walked around the table. Then we had a little flower girl, and she was dropping petals for them where they walked.
So is it meant to be as a reenactment of sorts of your
Kind of,
wedding?
yes. Mm-hmm.
It's a special. Was it a surprise?
No, it was not a surprise. We put it on.
And what is this church?
That's just up the hill here. You can see it from our house. And that's where I was baptized, confirmed, First Holy Communion, married, and to this day we still belong to that church.
So you've attended there your entire life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that unusual for this area?
No, if we just happened to be born and raised here and you just went to that church and you stayed with it.
And is it different today than it was then?
Yes, because we've added on to the church since. Enlarged it.
And what did it look like before?
That's a picture of the before. And then the after, where the altar is now, that was moved back further. It was added on, and the altars were moved back further.
So it doesn't look quite like this anymore.
No, the altars are still the same.
And when was this?
This, what year was that taken? I would say in the 50s, sometime in the 50s. Because the adding on wasn't done until about 1970, something like that.
Here we have a school.
Yes, and that's just over in the next block. That's a school I attended to in 2nd and 3rd grade, St. Joseph's Catholic School. And also when we weren't attending the Catholic school, on Sundays when we would come in for church, between 10 and 11 we would go over to that school for religious education. The nuns, had different group classes of different grades. And for an hour we would be going to Sunday school over there.
Okay, now is this your birth home?
This is my grandma Irma's house. It's the house I was born in. It's on 220 South Main, Dickinson. It's still there. So I have quite a few memories from living there for 2 years.
What is something that stands out from just looking at this photo?
It used to have a wrought iron fence in front of it. I don't know whether it's still there or not, and a wrought iron gate. And there was like 2 living rooms and just 1 bedroom, and it was a big kitchen. And it had a basement, but it wasn't made out. It was just kind of a big hole in the ground, And I just remember that the bathroom was so large, a great big tub. I remember that part of it. And from there I would walk to the school, which was about 4 blocks, which wasn't, all that far. But every time I drive by there, this is where I was born.
Do you drive by there?
Quite often if I happen to head south for something. So I drive by. It's only about 4 blocks west of here, so it isn't very far.
Is it neat to have your birth home at the same time? And this is
the farm where I grew up. There's the houses there. And
can you kind of point out the buildings for us?
okay. So here's the house. And over here I think was a brooder house over there. And then here was a man-made lake, or that's where you go ice skating during the winter. There's summer, there'd be a lot of water snakes in there. The boys would go down and throw them out. Then here was a granary. And then here was the barn. I think there was like a loafing barn there. And I think was a garage. I think was there a garage here. And then some more granaries. And the back was just fields. The background was just fields.
And what do you remember just looking at this photo?
I think that river. And then we had the garden used to be in here someplace before this picture was taken. And then the pump for the garden was up in here somewhere where we had the water running down to the garden. And then too, there was another farm leading from here. You can't see the farm. Whereas there were some old rock buildings where my dad's cousin used to live. And then that house burned down, so they moved into Dickinson, but there was another road leading up this way. But the barn, that's where we milked.
And where would you usually play with your siblings?
The siblings, I think right in the yard, or we had a hill up this way, a couple of hills. We'd play up in there. Or then later years we had, in the trees back here too. There was there, let me see here. I think this here is an outhouse there. By
It
the
looks
trees.
big.
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't.
Is that it, maybe?
That probably is it there, and there's some other building there.
And is this a clothesline?
A clothesline, I think there's some, this was taken after my parents moved to town, and my brother lived there. I think those are diapers hanging on the line.
So what year would this have been taken then?
Let's see, Johnny died in 1966. I would say about 1962. It was an aerial photo.
Anything else about this picture you want to tell?
No, I think that's about it. And this picture is kind of what it looked like maybe 15 years after my brother passed away. And so the place was empty. You can tell the fence posts are laying down, and it was just not taken care of anymore because she moved to town. And the land was rented out, but nobody lived in the house, so everything kind of...
And what year was this?
What year? This was about 81.
And is it, what do you feel when you look at this and you see...
It's still home, no matter what it looks like, it's still home. We do get out there once in a while, and we still go into the house and see where the bedrooms were, while the kitchen covers were all taken out and things like that, but it's still home. Where the living room was, and the big kitchen, and it was added on years later too. But no matter how it looks, it's still home to us. And the barn is still in the best shape. You don't see the barn here, but they're still in the best shape. But the house is kind of falling apart. Because squirrels, raccoons get in there up into the attic, but
It's still home.
yeah, still home.
Any last thoughts on this picture?
I think that's about it. It was down in there where there was a garden, but there's just overgrown with trees.